Here is that when you are doing PhD, probably you want to think right now to be a professor in the future, okay? And then you'll be more motivated to do good research and publish. You can always change your goal later. But now if you think, oh, I just want to be a researcher in a consulting company or something like that, probably you will lose motivation to finish your PhD. Anyway, so you need to do good research if you want to get a PhD, right? So to do good research, you need what? Pretty much data, right? Research data is very crucial, right? Pretty much here, everyone here has to do some kind of empirical research. You get the data, right? And so in IST, somehow, most of us, we got first-hand data. Sometimes we got second-hand data. Second-hand data means, well, probably we get the data from database and publish the data, so on and so forth. Huh? And for the first-hand data, pretty much probably we need to deal with the human subjects. And for example, in my case, I need to do lab study to understand how people interact with technologies, visualization or other kind of virtuality technologies, right? And in other situations, you want to see how people behave in different kind of setups, like organizational setup, culture setups. It does not work anymore? Okay. So how hard is to get the data, right? Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard, right? In particular, nowadays we are dealing with a big data. Somehow we want to see, okay, we want to get some kind of interesting data. You guys probably heard about this, right? And Facebook research, right? And then, of course, it stirs a lot of cries from the media, from the research, right? So the basic idea, basically a story here that, well, Facebook did research, find out emotion is contagious, right? But what they did not tell you that actually they collected data without letting people know what's going on, right? So people are manipulated without being told, right? Of course, it's my phone? Okay, so.
Calling behind the Wi-Fi.
Kevin, do you want to get the phone? Okay. So you can see New York Times and US News, they all reported on this story, right? So what went wrong here? Basically, Facebook researchers and researchers from Cornell who said they only did the data analysis, no data collection. Somehow they collect data without letting people know, right? So they want to advance their research, but to take advantage of their users, right? So somehow they want to collect as much data as possible, but for users, the more data they gave up, and the more privacy they sacrifice, right? Probably more harmful. So it's a kind of balance. When you want to do research, you want to get that data, but people don't want to do that, okay? So there's a kind of the demand to balance the data you want to have and the data people want to give you. Okay, so the key idea here is that when you deal with human subjects, as well as the animals and other kind of agents, right? Usually in IST, we don't deal with animals. We only deal with human subjects. You got to ensure the integrity and safety and the rights and dignity of the human subject, okay? So basically, if you don't want to do those kind of experiment on yourself, probably you should not do that on your human subjects, okay? So we call it human subject, we call it participants, either way, okay? The key issue here that, well, and we should treat them with respect, right? And we should collect data in a very, very legal way, right? And as the common sense, right? Use your judgment. Of course, we can do that, right? And so, but some mad scientists, they want to do something else. Have you guys seen this movie, Extreme Measures? Okay. A student can to watch the clip later. So, if you have watched the movie, probably you can recall the story. So this guy tried to save the world by curing the disease, right? But he kidnapped the homeless people and did experiment on those people. Those people eventually died. Hugh Grant, the young guy, who is a prodigy, right, and said, "Oh, I don't want to do that," right? So, the big story, of course, so justice always wins, right? But here, the fundamental story, the principle here is to protect human subjects. For those homeless people in that movie, and based on what the movie said, they are heroes. They make the science move forward. But the young guy said they did not want to be hero, right? They did not volunteer to be the hero, right? So here, basically, we have to look at how we do that. Somehow we use laws, we use regulations to help us and to protect human subject, right? And we take appropriate actions and in appropriate scopes. But it's not always easy to follow, right? Sometimes some people make mistakes or probably did something wrong on purpose, right? You may think, in the old stories, probably heard about this, right? Back to 30s, last century somehow, and there was medical studies on African American, right? So basically, the story is that even though the medicines were available to those people, they were not told because data need to be collected from them, okay? Also, somehow, another study on some kind of on children, right? They were intentionally infected for the hepatitis virus, and they want to collect the data, okay? So cases like this actually force people to think about the research responsibilities and eventually lead to the IRB institution, okay? Of course, recently, and it's about the privacy, right? Edward Snowden let us know somehow there are certain practices like personal scandal, where the government collected information, right, and illegally, also abuse the visa, this kind of act. They are supposed to only collect the communication information if, and the communication is initiated from another country, but now actually FBI is abusing the visa, right? Somehow we need a mechanism to protect a human subject, right? So right now, pretty much we use so-called IRB, Institutional Review Board, to help us to follow the guidelines to protect human subjects, okay? Somehow, IRB now becomes so mandatory, and when you apply for grants, like NSF, NIH, any government agencies, you have to show, you have to go through the IRB process, you get approval, right? Otherwise, there's a problem. So what is IRB? IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. Penn State, we have one. All other major universities have one, okay? And for private companies, that's not the case. That's why the Facebook got some problem, okay? They don't have to follow the government guidelines, okay? So IRB look at the protocols involved in the research, such as how you are going to recruit subjects and how they are going to be paid, and how are you going to collect data, preserve data, so on and so forth, okay? So the IRB application is very, very and it's not complicated, it's like tedious. It's a procedure-based, very detail-oriented. You provide all kinds of information. I will show you an example later, okay? So you need to provide how many subjects you want, and where you're going to recruit, and what kind of script you are going to read when you recruit the subject. Suppose you are coming to a class and read the script to the classroom, right? And how you are going to do the consent process, which is very, very critical. Basic consent is a way to let people know their rights and their responsibility, right? And so you are going to tell what kind of the methodology are involved, how you collect the data, where to store the data, how to preserve the privacy, okay? Confidentiality, so on and so forth, right? And are you going to pay money, or are you going to give students a credit, okay? So consent form, this is most important document in the whole IRB application. Basically, in one page, you tell a participant the nature of study, okay, what kind of the benefits or risks they may have, and what kind of rights they have. So basically, consent form has something like you can quit the study anytime you want, okay? So you may say, oh, is that right? So basically, participant can get my money and then doing nothing. Literally speaking, yes, they can, okay? But usually people don't do that. But you need to let them know that's a right, right? And you also must get the signature from the participant, and then preserve the physical copy. Okay, yes?
I have a simple question.
Yeah.
For example, I just want to make a simple survey. Have you ever used the computer before? Maybe this survey is only this simple.
Yeah.
Do I need to use this procedure?
So the thing, basically, IRB is that if you want to get the government, federal agency's money, right, this is required. But if you just do kind of simple practice and like, you know, in class, like very 1 or 2 question survey, that's not usually required. However, if you do some kind of serious study, such as you want to design a survey, even if it's a 5 question, but you want to collect data and then use that data for analysis, probably for the publication, it's always a good practice to get the data. We will look at certain types of IRBs because not every survey requires IRB. I mean, rigorous IRB procedure. And there are different kinds of IRB. Some are simple, some are more complicated.
But this means that if for publication, no matter what simple, generally need.
So usually, when you do the publications, you know, every reviewer can have the right to answer a question: do you have IRB or not? If you don't have IRB, basically the editor can reject your paper.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me show you. This is my IRB, right? So my IRB, you can see. So how many pages? Is like 17 pages, right? And so you need to go through, you know, every details to talk about everything. You know, because of time, I cannot go through every items. I just want to show you the consent form. So this is consent form, right? Informed consent form for social science research. You can see this is a seal, right? And somehow, I got approval from IRB, and this seal must be placed on every consent form, okay? And purpose of study, procedure, risk, right? Benefits, and statement, and I do or do not, signature, okay? So, as soon as I get approval from IRB, I cannot change one single character on this consent form, okay? If you want to change anything, you need to resubmit and then get approval again, okay? So that's very strict. And so regarding your question, so different kinds of IRB, right? So as I said, NASA policy required this, and NIH also required this. And if you do not follow IRB, the impact could be very significant, okay? Basically, if Penn State has one case, right, under investigation for IRB violation, NSF can come and say, well, okay, during the time period of investigation, no NSF money can be used at all until the case is over. That means any NSF money. So for us, that's fine. But you think about the other departments, right? Probably they purchase a certain agent or animals. That means they cannot use this stuff at all. So you can think about the damage to the whole university, okay? There are some cases here. You can look at the nature here, right? Somehow, in that particular hospital, they use ineligible patient to do that, right? Of IRBs, in certain cases, you cannot use prisoners. You cannot use mentally challenged people, as a subject. And in this case, there's no IRB at all when they do the brain scan, right? And the other two cases actually involve these researchers researcher from the United States, but their research was in China. First case, and it's so-called the golden rice. And actually, when I heard the story, I was in China. People asked me, what's going on? So they tested the two, basically they tried to look at the GM rice, the golden rice, right? And they tested it on kids, but they did not tell the parents what's going on. They just said, oh, that's a kind of the enhanced nutrition you want your kids to have. The other one is the Harvard genetic researchers. They want to study the genetic reasons of the asthma. So they give people wrong information about what's going on. So we throw blood from people in small villages and did not review the intent of the research. Anyway, so what's going on here? Oh, it's here. So anyway, you can look at the stories here, okay? Anyway, so let me ask you this. What kind of research required to file, right? Suppose I would do a study published or any study involving human subject. This is related to your question, actually. Yeah. So strictly speaking, it's like this. Any project, okay? So for the class project, usually if, for example, if I'm teaching information visualization class, student doing human subject related study, so I can apply for IRB. It's called the blanket IRB to cover the whole class. Basically saying students are collecting data regarding evaluation of the information visualization tools, right? And for this kind of the IRB, usually it's easy to get, okay? Where to file? So this is a website you guys should know. Okay, it's called the PRAMS, Protocol Review Approval Management System, and this is where you apply for your IRB. Get a certificate of your IRB training. Okay, so and usually when you when you're going to do a project, the first thing is to think about: do you need to get an IRB or not? If you need to get the data from human subject, file IRB as soon as possible because it takes time to get the IRB approval. Before you get the result, get the approval, you cannot collect data, okay? And remember this, it's not about whether you file or not, it's whether you get results or not. So now let's go back to your question. There are different kinds of IRBs. Some are difficult, some are easier, right? For example, first case is called exempt review. Basically, it says, well, for your research, you do not collect data directly from human subject, right? You collect the educational test results, secondary data, and IRB committee will say, no, we don't need a review. So, and the secretary can make a decision by saying, no, you can just go ahead, right? The second one is that expedited review is it's no committee review. It's very fast, okay? Basically, it says your research involves minimal risk, such as you collect data from voice, video, well, and you study individual group behaviors. Usually in ISD, when we do the kind of human subject research, HCI related, pretty much we can use expedited review. It's very fast, okay? The third one is called the full review. Full review is more complicated. They need to look at the protocols and everything. More importantly, it requires the presence of all the IRB members. That's why it does not happen often, probably once a month or twice a month. You need to wait for their cycle, right? But for expedited review, exempt review, it's very fast, okay? So, and I have seen some mistakes inside the IST, for people handling IRB. So if you, as a student are doing research for advisor, come to a class to recruit a subject, you got to make sure the IRB has been approved, okay? And you got to make sure the appropriate types IRB. Okay. Usually your advisor can take care of this, but when you are asked to collect data, you also need to do this. Okay. So whenever you are dealing with kind of research, you are involved, you need to get IRB training. Okay. Penn State, we have this kind of training program, also have CITI training programs. My advice is that you guys can do this right now. Usually it takes probably 1 hour or so to get everything, right? If you get a certificate in your email from now on, you can do this kind of studies involving human subjects, okay? And so basically the different modules, you read those materials and you take the test. After pass the test, you will get an email certificate, and then you are qualified. But it's not the qualification is not a lifetime long, right? You have to redo that every, 3 years or 5 years, I forgot. Okay. Anyway, so I mentioned this earlier on. It's your responsibility to look at and somehow whether your IRB has been appropriate or not. Okay. That's why, one graduate student coming to my class is saying, "Hey, Dr. Zhang, I need to recruit some students." I said, "Do you have IRB? If you don't have IRB, don't bother to come to class, okay? And also look at whether IRB, they match or not. Are you doing the kind of exempt or expedited? And then look at whether data types can match. Again, I think this is a way to protect yourself, right? Suppose you got exempted IRB, but what you are collecting actually fall into another category. And so it's your fault or it's your advisor's fault or somebody else's fault, right? So be careful with this. Okay, so verify the consent form. In particular, look at the seal. Okay, look at the seal to see whether it's approved by IRB or not. Okay. Also, you need to follow the procedures very, very tightly and read the script. Don't change anything. Okay. Anyway, so as I said, I think all you guys need to take IRB. But someone say, well, computer science background. Should I do IRB? I never deal with the real human subject. Well, you never know. I can tell you a case, right? In one of the research workshops, right, a Stanford PhD student from computer science who worked with Google researchers present a research with a picture like this. And then a question was asked. Have you done IRB? Do you know the answer? The student, what is IRB? People would kind of think, oh, he was joking. It turns out he didn't know that at all. Okay, of course, in that workshop, most researchers are from human-computer interaction side. They were kind of appalled by the answer by saying, no, you cannot do that, right? So the appropriate practice should be like this. You are not supposed to show the whole face of the juniors, right? You should always use certain techniques to hide that face, right? Or something like this. Don't show the front. Anyway, that means even if you're a computer scientist, you are doing research probably involving certain data from other people, or you presented data in certain venues, you need to be aware of how to protect the benefits of the subject, other people, right? Okay. Okay, so in terms of data collection, confidentiality, privacy are the two major concerns. I can move quickly a little bit, okay? So basically, to talk about what data to collect and how you present the data or share the data with other people, okay? And who can have access. Okay, so usually for demographic data, we can collect the gender, age group, these kind of things to know what kind of the users you have, and later when you do data analysis, you can do the kind of the group analysis, like a gender or age versus also different kind of the ethnicity groups, right? But if you want to collect something more, in particular, in human-computer interaction or social informatics area, you need to have very good reason to do that, okay? In addition to that, you can collect the subject performance data from the experiment, okay? And the issue here is that you need to make sure all those parameters or variables you are going to collect are declared in the IRB. If you want to collect something more, and actually you may plan a potential danger for yourself in the future, okay? So when you collect the data, in particular when you do the experiment, you collect the people's information, you know who they are. But when you store the data, you got to make sure to separate the identity information from the data you are collected, okay? Of course, anonymity may not be sufficient, okay? Let me show you two examples here. And now because of the big data, right? Somehow, you can easily identify someone. For example, in this project by saying, well, if you want to look at one particular person, right? So for example, if I put a certain name there, let me put my birthday there in this particular area. So surprisingly, you find that only one person. You see? I put my birthday there, my gender there in the the zip code, only one person. No. I tried my wife's birthday, one person. Surprise, right? And so if you think, well, this is not a surprise, but birthday, what the birth can do. Look at this study by CMU, right? Basically, the CMU research shows, well, with sufficient public data, right, you can guess a person's social security number. So the inferences were made possibly by the access of personal information from multiple sources, including the data brokers, profile social networks, and then we can guess your social security number, okay? So we all know social security number is important, the importance of social security number, right? And if they got the social security number plus your address and everything on, identity thief is possible. Okay, so that's why it's very important for you to think about how to protect the privacy of the subject. You don't want them to be the victim of the other crimes, okay? So in terms of the access to the data, you need to think about who can get that and in what ways, okay? And so original data or partial data, so on and so forth, okay? In terms of data storage, right now, the biggest threat is that, well, we use computers, we use a network, we even use a cloud storage. Somehow it becomes easy to us, right, access the data, but it's also easier for the hackers to get into the data. And I was in China in the summer. Probably some of you guys heard about this. In China, back to July, a very, very serious data breach happened. Someone hacked into the database of the Chinese government, I forgot which government agencies, the database of AIDS patients, right? And then they began to blackmail those people by calling them, asking, pay a certain amount of money and otherwise they'll make it public. If you refuse, and they just call the company by saying, they pretend to be the government agencies. You're the person in your company who and he got AIDS and he need to come to here to do some tests. Suddenly, the information became public. Okay, that's why nowadays you got to make sure the encryption and also other kind of security measures, right? And it's very dangerous world right now, in particular when you use the cloud computing, right? So that's why usually I don't use the cloud storage too much, but if necessary, I need to split the files, right? And anyway, so regarding the sort of the procedures, other things, again, you can find out the policies regarding how to protect human subjects and privacy, okay? You may ask what happened to the Facebook case, right? For the Facebook, actually PNAS had editorial piece and showing their concern with this kind of practice, right? After the paper was criticized by the media, right? And as you can see here, right? Somehow, the Cornell said, well, the researchers from Cornell did not do the data collection. They only helped data analysis. Who knows, right? But for the Facebook, the editor said, well, for the private companies, they are not obligated to follow the government policies, right? Because they do not get money from the government. So, but for the public institutes like us, we must, right? And then for the private companies, actually, it's like they becomes whether they want to volunteer to follow the government federal guidelines or not. Okay. Okay. So, well, what if a private citizen use their own money to do harmful research on their own body, like this guy? What's the IRB, right? Anyway, so it's a still kind of open questions. So somehow the question would be: suppose people who did this kind of research got significant results. Can we publish results or not? Right? And it's like, human, right now the cloning stem cell research are very controversial, right? But other countries actually have different kind of laws. If the researcher in other countries got some results, want to publish here, should we allow or not, right? It's not easy. Anyway, so I know you guys are hungry. I'm hungry, actually. Let's just summarize quickly. So to me, it's like research ethics are very broad, right? Starting from data collection all the way to publication. At the same time, your daily life here in ISD also involves a lot of the ethic-related issues, right? So you need to know the regulation policies, follow the guidelines. And of course, I think, use your judgment, common sense. If you don't feel comfortable, probably that's not right. But here, I want to emphasize one thing, the culture difference, right? And, people from other countries may have kind of different understanding or different kind of practices. Certain practices regarding OK in other countries are not regarding is not permitted here, right? So, and that's why you guys, so we got to be careful. Also, as a group, you need to help each other. If you see some kind of the potentially inappropriate practices, probably it's also good to remind others, right? In terms of IRB, I think it's like always think about the benefits of the participants, or ask yourself, do I want to be the subject or not? If you don't, probably that's not right. Okay, so eventually, it's like if you encounter certain issues, you're not quite sure what to do. Come to your advisor, come to us. We have all kinds of the mechanism and the ways to address the concerns. Okay, and usually somehow we have all kinds of the cases probably similar to what you have encountered, right? And then we can use those cases to help you to address the issues, right? And I know pursuing a degree is very important, but you want to do the right way. That's why the last I want to say is that, you want to do good research, right? But bad research is worse than no research. In particular, the bad research is somehow produced by some ethically wrong practices. So you may get a degree from the bad research, but if something happen in the future, and you'll be haunted forever. Your degree may be retracted, and your reputation will be damaged. Okay. Nowadays we are in a very open society, in particular for research communities, and everything can be easily made public. If there any research misconduct, sooner or later, people will know. Okay, so 5 minutes. We have any questions? Yes.
That Facebook example, if it was, say it was like slightly different in maybe the academic they were more involved or something like that, where it wasn't necessarily a company. Like, how responsible would you be to make sure it's not like fine print, to make sure the subjects know what you're actually...
Okay, so I guess your question is that, so I want to do research, right? I want to let the subject know what I'm doing, but I don't want them know every detail. I want to put some fine prints there.
Yeah, like how responsible are you that they actually understand what they're signing?
So usually for the consent form, somehow you should provide general information, but in terms of research design, certain things you cannot let the subject know, and then that can damage your research design. So in that case, you can certainly you don't have to tell them. In terms of fine prints, I mean, you talk about the potential risks, potential dangers, all those kind of things.
Like for that Facebook example, like say Facebook did like fine print where they said this, but then
we cannot do, for us, we cannot do fine prints.
Yeah.
So you remember the consent form here, right? Let me find that. What's that? Oh, not here. Consent form. Who is it? Oh, IRB, yes. So here, you see, discomfort and risk, right? I just put here, there's no risks. Yeah. If there's any risk, you need to spell out. You cannot hide at all. Fine print is kind of practiced by commercial companies, right? People don't read that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like check.
No. In this case, is that, for example, in certain medical research, right? Indeed, people can have certain discomfort or the kind of the reactions. They have to let them know, and then let them decide: do I want to go through or not? In the movie, it's like, okay, you may die. Do you want to be the subject or not? Right? If you die, we pay you $5 million, or do you want to do that or not? So you need to let them know. You cannot hide. So it's very different from commercial practice. No fine print. Otherwise, IRB is not functional. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Rich.
So on collaborative projects across multiple institutions, suppose there's human data collection coming from these subjects at multiple institutions.
Yeah.
Together in the same project. Will a researcher at institution 1 have to also fill out an IRB for institution 2?
So it depends on the question is that if you have different institutions and then you do the research, how the IRB procedures will look like. Depends on how you do the grants, right? Usually you can have so-called collaborative proposal. Each side writes their own proposal, and then each side has to submit IRB separately to their own institute. But if you just have a subcontract to the other party, and then that's your responsibility to ask the other party, do you have an IRB or not? So basically, it's who should check the IRB. In the first case, government agency will look at that. But in the second case, you are the PI. They are just subcontractors, so you are responsible for what they are doing. In that case, you need to look at them and to see whether they applied or not. They also need to apply it by themselves.
Right, but they will need to have an IRB from their institution?
Yes.
Not
Yes.
Okay, so in the end of the day, I won't have to, if I'm PI, I won't have to fill out an IRB for, say, Penn State and...
But if they do not collect data on their side, they don't have to. If they all have to come to this side to collect the data, that's fine.
It's a site of the data collection.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
How about if I collect the information from the social media?
Oh yeah. Okay. That's falling into probably the first case, exempt to the IRB. Okay. In that case, you still need to file, but it's very easy to get approval. Actually, I mentioned the training, right? In that training, there's a module talking about online data collection, talk about how you do that. Yeah. That's actually much easier. Okay, last question. Okay, sure.
If I conduct a survey, should I destroy the papers just after the research, or should save it for years?
No, you should not destroy the paper. I still keep my thesis data. After this
I
is
mean
like
the original paper,
Yeah.
survey paper.
yeah. If you can keep that. Otherwise, you can scan them and put somewhere. So, as you can see in my slide said, where do you keep the data? File cabinet. Usually, people use the physical storage, right? But now more and more become digitized. Okay. So of course, it's burden to carry the paper around. If you can digitize it by scanning, that's fine.
Okay.
But if the volume is not significant, probably keeping those original paper is a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, thank you guys. My office is through 7D. If you have any questions, feel free to stop by, and I'm happy to help you guys. Thank you.